Hey there, emerging expat. You're tuned in to Let's Move to Portugal. I'm Victoria from Expats Everywhere's podcast, and I have the distinct honor of bringing you, YouTube travelers, and our resident of Portugal experts, Expats Everywhere's Josh and Kalie. Each week they'll inspire, they'll educate, and they'll accompany you on your journey to Portuguese residency. This week on Let's Move to Portugal, Josh and Kalie reflect on their expat experiences in Portugal and Singapore, highlighting cultural contrasts, lifestyle choices, and the challenges of adapting to life in Europe versus Asia.
Hey expats and travelers alike, welcome back to the Expats Everywhere presents Let's Move to Portugal podcast. And before I ask Kalie how she's doing, just wanted to let you listener know that this podcast is going to be a little different. It will not fit our normal format of lovely introduction from Victoria. We should have that, but we will not have our regular weekly welcome as we want to roll into our comparison between Portugal and Singapore, as we just made a trip to Singapore and we have not dived into the question, would we move back to Singapore, especially based on what we just experienced? Kalie, how you doing?
Oh, dang, I was going to try to beat you to it and ask you first. I'm doing well. I think this is going to be a fun one because we loved Singapore when we lived there. We lived there for 4 years.
You just said loved.
Well, loved when we lived. It was all past tense.
Okay.
We'll get to it. But, you know, it was before COVID, so we ended up moving in 2019. And so obviously we weren't there during COVID, which is fine.
Yep.
It's back to normal now. But we didn't experience any of that. But we were there for 4 years. And of all the places we've lived, that was the longest place. We have now surpassed it.
Just surpassed it,
living in Portugal.
Yeah, I think it's almost like poetic that we're now comparing Portugal and Singapore together because we oftentimes get this question, what is your favorite place that you have lived? And granted, we've not lived in every corner of the well, actually, we've kind of lived in every corner of the world.
Not every
we've
country.
We've not lived in every country of the world.
Every continent either.
We have traveled. Yeah, but who lives in Antarctica, right?
Well, but we haven't lived in Australia.
Or South America.
Australasia is but we've been.
We've traveled
all these places.
We've traveled to a ton of places.
Wait,
matter of
before
fact.
we really unpack it though, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Throw that in.
I'm doing well. I think that we don't need to break the flow of this to ask how I'm doing.
But I feel bad if I don't.
Oh,
you know?
don't.
Okay.
Don't. That's too American of you.
Okay.
Although Portuguese do it too.
Yeah.
To the bone, to the bone, to the bank, to the bank. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
Viva.
back to we have not. We've not lived in every corner of the world, but we kind of lived in the regions. Well, I guess, listener, to give you an idea of what we're talking about, we first started our journey living in Spain. So we lived and then traveled a lot of Europe. And then we headed to Asia. We were in South Korea, and we traveled a lot of, there. Obviously, what's around there? You've got Taiwan, China, Japan. Those are kind of the bigger areas there. Kind of funny that I started with Taiwan. I don't know. Is that what you're laughing at, Josh?
No,
if you're looking at watching this on YouTube with the video, then Josh was laughing. I mean, I thought maybe it's because I started with Taiwan, but I was just thinking south first,
No,
and then I was moving
I'm
around.
actually just wondering how you're going to explain the Middle East as a corner because you can't really be a corner.
Middle.
When
Actually,
you're in the
it's a really great location. Right. So then from there we went to Saudi Arabia, and we were able to explore a lot of the Middle East, and that got us to Africa easily as well because Africa, easier I think.
Yeah.
Because it is so central. So honestly, the Middle East is a great place to base yourself because of where it is, and you can travel to so many places, and it doesn't feel so daunting compared to other
probably
places.
had our most interesting travel year while living in Saudi.
Oh, yeah. Well, we went to places that maybe aren't as common to visit, and we had a lot of time off, so we were able to travel a lot. That was a good job. And then we went to Singapore.
Unknown.
Yeah. And then we went to Singapore, which gave us access to Southeast Asia and Australia, the islands around there. Australasia, I guess, is what it's called now. Although when we were in school, the continent was just called Australia.
Australia.
Yeah. So that has given us a lot. Except, and then we're from the U.S., so traveling around Canada and then South America, Central America.
Yeah.
A lot of that.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is that we have done a video on YouTube where we compared the two, but in that video, it was much more objective. We, had some criteria that we went by, compared the two countries based much more on objective criteria than maybe just our personal experiences, anecdotal. And
well, you even bring that up. You say the data says in that video, and that was a lot more data driven, right?
But I think that we need to get into the points of comparing the two even though it seems like a very strange comparison, and it is, and we'll definitely unpack that. But we can dive more today into talking about how we felt in both countries, because countries can have positives and negatives, but the feeling I think that one gets when they're living there, that is more subjective or is completely subjective, is probably the more important thing when you're talking about whether you want to live there or not.
Where you should live, yeah. And that's even by city, right? I mean...
Oh, absolutely.
So it really just depends. Okay.
So are you saying that this comparison is going to be much more about Porto versus Singapore?
No, not necessarily, because we've traveled, well, all of Singapore, because it's quite tiny, so it's easy to get around. But we have traveled
Singapore
a lot
in and of itself is like
a city. Yeah. I mean, we can compare it to Porto, but I think we should also do comparisons to different parts of Portugal, too.
Okay.
I mean, we have been around Portugal a lot.
We have been around.
Well, a lot. I mean, we have a lot of experience, and we had experience from Portugal, like when we lived in Spain.
Yeah.
We visited a lot of Portugal as well.
Yes.
And then once we moved back here, we spent really our first year traveling a lot of Portugal. I think because of COVID, it was just easier to stay in the country, right?
Yeah. And times have changed. I mean,
Yes.
from the first time we visited to now.
Yes. Very true.
Not as much from 3 years ago whenever we were traveling all of Portugal. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the first thing I want to say is that you really should stick around to the end because Kalie and I'm talking to the listener, not you. You have to stick around to the end.
I'll be here. I got my coffee.
Is we have not actually discussed whether or not we want to move back to Singapore, because that is a thing. I mean, we in the past had talked about potentially moving back to Singapore, not as any indictment on Portugal, but just the life that we had there was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And we felt very at home there. There are a couple things that made us feel very, very at home, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But we have not actually discussed. We waited until this episode to actually have the conversation.
With each other. So we don't know each other's answers.
And now whether or not we would expat Singapore again. So.
Would it be like re-expat? Expat again?
No.
I don't know. Is
no.
that a thing? Whether we would go back.
Yeah.
But would you expat Singapore?
So Kalie.
We'll get there.
Where are we starting?
Well, let's talk about, I think, things that made us comfortable in Singapore. And do they make us comfortable the same things in Portugal, or do they not?
Okay. So the very first thing that stuck out to me when traveling back to Singapore, the very first thing, and this is everybody's first thing, is Changi Airport.
Oh, such a beautiful airport.
What a phenomenal hub to be your home airport if you're living there. If you're living in Singapore, then drop us a comment and let us know how much you love Changi. And if you don't love Changi, let us know why, because I think you're absolutely mad.
That's crazy. How
it's
could you
rated
not
it's
love
rated
it?
Consistently like top 3 airports in the world. I think actually in the past couple years it's been rated number one.
Yeah.
Maybe Hamad Airport. I think it's Hamad Airport in
Is that Doha?
Qatar. Yeah, in Doha.
Gets in there too.
Is also up there.
Yeah.
But the thing I love about Changi, which I didn't get to experience this time that we arrived, is when you are a resident of Changi.
Of Singapore,
sorry.
You could live there.
Changi, when you're a resident of Singapore, passing through Changi is very, very simple. But even as a non-resident, it's pretty darn easy.
Well, here's the thing. They have so much that's just automated, right? So for Americans, let's say when we're traveling around Europe, now that's becoming more of a thing where they have the automatic gates that you can go through because of your passport. So it's okay if you're not a resident, you can still actually use that. However, if you have a minor with you, then you can't. So you have to stand in lines. So minors can't use that. I think you have to be, some of it's 16, sometimes it's 18 to go through those gates. So that's a bit of a bummer and quite slow. So you have
Soul crushing.
Yeah, so that's really tough. That's really tough. But this is where Singapore has an amazing, it's so smart. Like, why doesn't everyone do this? So they have all the automated ones, and they have like the immigration officers that are on the other side in case something happens and you need help or whatever.
Yeah.
But they have this other section off the side with many stalls, but like bigger stalls. That
Not
is for,
many as in small.
no,
but
many, like a lot.
Yeah.
So there's not going to be like lines or anything.
Yeah.
With these bigger stalls that are for people who are with families or who need special assistance.
Yeah.
And here, what you do is you click how many people are in your party. So for us, it would be 3. And then one by one, you go. So if with a minor, you have to go in this area, but you all kind of process it together.
Yeah.
It is so fast and efficient. It's like, this makes sense. If anyone has the gates anyway, why don't you have gates for people who need extra assistance or with a minor?
Yeah.
So smart.
No, phenomenal. Facial recognition, and then you're through.
And then you're good.
And they're like, welcome to Singapore.
But the immigration officer does check on the other side when you're with a minor. But they have their little, like, what looks like an iPad tablet walking around. It makes sense.
Singapore's living in the future.
They are.
And that's the thing I appreciate about it. So the you know, like the first impression that one gets, actually when you're just walking out of the gate on the Sky Bridge, is a perfume that is just permeating the air. And it's not just that Changi, but it's in other parts of the city. But
Josh loves that.
I love it. I love it. Call me bougie.
All right, bougie.
But I think that it creates primal branding. It's definitely done that for me.
That's true. It's something familiar. But in speaking of airports, I would say I do like the Porto Airport in the sense that it is quite efficient with how they do things, even with more lines, not as efficient as Singapore. But I think the size of it is comfortable enough that it has everything you need, but it's not too big where it's like you feel like you have to run to a different terminal or you have to take like a little metro thing to a different terminal.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's manageable.
But that's Porto.
That's Porto. I do not like Lisbon Airport.
Lisbon's airport is, it's a mess.
Yeah.
The other positive for Portugal is that when you do have to come in, well, you mainly have to come in contact with humans, but when you're coming in contact with humans and you have a kid, people are very nice. People are very, very nice. When you do not have a kid, it's a little more of a mixed bag. People are still nice, but you're not treated with smiles and rainbows and such.
And with kids, minors, they do tend to have a separate line for you as well, which is really nice. But anyway,
depending on the age of the kid, but yeah.
Okay.
So that was the first impression, and then we getting into the ride share that we took, which is Grab, not Uber or Bolt. There in Singapore, everything just felt very familiar.
It's very pretty too. The drive is just so comfortable. It's organized because obviously we were in Malaysia just before going back to Singapore. And
KL is chaos.
Yes.
Singapore is calm.
Yes.
Now, some people hate that about Singapore.
That's true.
Some people think that Singapore feels very sterile because of that, because things are very like in their place and orderly. But I like that predictability.
Me too. Well, I'm a very organized person, so I prefer that kind of like organization.
Yeah.
And I do think some people will call it like draconian,
I don't know. Well, that's in
because of
terms
the
of like
laws
the laws
and stuff.
But
I mean, we get to that too. But personally, I mean, we're not doing anything wrong, so it creates an atmosphere that's very safe, and people are looking out for each other. So I do kind of like that.
You know what's interesting though is depending on where you are in Singapore, you will see people jaywalk, which jaywalking in Portugal, it feels a bit like a national sport. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you go to different parts of Europe and you'll see, like for sure you can recognize German tourists when they're here.
Because they wait.
They will just like wait at the crosswalk when the light is red. They will wait. Spanish will go. French depends. Portuguese will also go.
Yeah.
I go.
Yeah. Well, that's what you do here. I don't know. It's just a little faster.
Yeah. So when I did that in Singapore, in one particular area of town, I got scolded by Kalie.
Yeah, I was like, don't do that. You don't do that here, remember?
But some people do.
Depending on where you are. I think what neighborhood you're in.
For sure.
Because there are very diverse neighborhoods too.
But I did. I was very Portuguese about it, and I was like, I'm not waiting for this light.
Don't do that.
I wait for the bureaucracy. I don't wait for crosswalks.
Gosh. Okay, so yeah, there are some things that they're stricter at.
Yeah.
Like you're not supposed to spit. That's another thing. Not
fine.
that you do. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. The gum thing always comes into conversation when talking about Singapore. They don't sell gum there. You're not supposed to have gum in the country. think people do.
People chew it.
Yeah, you just kind of, I don't know, have it in your bag when you come in from a different country. They don't ask you.
I did not expect this to come up, but because you're talking about gum, we got to talk about this.
Okay.
Smoking.
Okay.
So, I don't remember this when we lived there. I'm pretty sure it didn't exist, but in the last 3, 4, 5 years, they have introduced smoking boxes. Like it looks like a penalty box.
It's so funny.
Okay, so it's not like a walled box.
No.
But it is a painted box on the ground that is designated for smokers. Mm-hmm. So where we first encountered this was walking down Orchard Road, which is the most, what would I say? The most popular shopping street.
What you just call it like Rodeo Drive.
Yeah, but it's
it's different.
Bigger. It's bigger.
Beautiful
it's like
shopping.
Rodeo Avenue.
Yeah.
So it's this massive, very popular shopping street that has both tourists and locals. Okay. So outside of the shopping malls, there are these rectangles painted on the ground that designate for people to smoke. Now the funny thing is, one funny visual is that when you're walking by, like these people stick out like a sore thumb because there's like a bunch of people crammed into this relatively small box for the number of people that want to smoke. And two, the non-smokers walking by are almost looking at the smokers
like
with
a zoo.
Disgust.
Yeah, we started calling it the box of shame because it was kind of funny. Like people would really like look at like what's going on in there, I guess, whether you knew or not. But it is almost like they're in like the zoo.
Yeah.
But what I do like is they put them in places that aren't like right in front of the door.
Right.
Because this is a problem in Portugal. Like
Yes.
literally you go outside to smoke in a restaurant and people will stand right by the door. And it's like, what's the point? Because it is blowing into the restaurant.
Or just straight up in a football stadium.
Yeah,
where it's not allowed.
Yeah, but people still
do.
So yes, Singapore is trying to contain that, which I, as
Singapore,
a non-smoker, appreciate.
I disagree. Singapore is not trying to contain it. Singapore has contained it.
Has contained it. Okay, has contained it.
Yeah.
Yes. So I did like that. That's a good point. But far less people smoke anyway there. It's probably expensive too. I would say that they probably tax cigarettes pretty high.
I actually don't know, but yeah, I would assume.
Okay, so when we lived there, there weren't these boxes, but they still were strict on stuff. You couldn't remember, and vaping was was a big thing. But you couldn't at certain bars close to the door. You couldn't smoke or vape. Remember, there'd be signs and stuff. Yeah. So it's not that they had designated areas, but you had to get really far away from. You couldn't do it at your table, even on the outside.
Yeah, they've just taken the legislation against smoking to another level. Yeah, but the level works.
Yeah,
I think.
Again,
visually,
we are not. Yeah, it looks nicer. That's true. Yeah. We're non-smokers. So,
if you're a smoker, we're not attacking you.
Yeah, we're not. But it just for people who are non-smokers. Yeah. For me too, like. It's fine if you want to smoke, but I don't want to smell it. So that's where it's like, please don't leave a restaurant and smoke right in front of the door where it just blows in while I'm trying to eat, Correct. So which is a huge complaint, honestly, of many Americans when they're traveling, at least visiting Europe or maybe moving here and it's their first experience. You will have people sitting out, dining al fresco, so dining outside. And then the table beside you lights up, and what you do? Yep. A lot of people smoke in Europe.
Yuck.
Not so much in Singapore.
If you smoke, I'm not against it.
Okay,
Mom,
so that's
Mom,
true.
if you're listening, I love you. Okay, so that's that part of kind of Singapore and where the draconian laws work.
Yeah, well, let's circle back then, since we're on that, to safety. Because Portugal is highly rated as a safe country.
Not as safe as Singapore.
Although, I think if you look at
objectively
ratings...
and subjectively. Yeah, no, objectively and subjectively.
If you look at ratings, I think that depending on which list you're looking at, Singapore might be lower because of its geographic location in the world and what's around
That's different, though. That's the peace index.
Okay,
the peace index and safety are different.
Okay.
And I do think some people get confused by that. So peace index will take into account how the country is diplomatically. So the closer they are to like a Switzerland or a Canada in terms of like being very standoffish, like, oh, we don't want to cause a ruckus.
Okay, yeah. Neutral is what you're looking for.
That is what I'm looking for.
Okay.
I just wanted to say ruckus as well.
Okay. Since you never get to.
Yeah. So all that to say, Singapore is definitely safer. It feels safer. Not that Portugal feels necessarily dangerous. It doesn't. But absolutely Singapore feels safer. Personal safety, sending your kid alone on a metro or a bus.
It's common.
At 5, 6, maybe not 5, 6, 7, 8 years old.
When we lived there, yeah, elementary students were getting on the bus, just going a few stops. Of course, not super far.
Yeah.
But every day we would see the same kids that were getting on the bus to go to school, and they were young. I don't think that I would do that in Porto. Actually, I'm going to say I would not do that in Porto at that age.
Not at that age. Not
too
at that
young.
age.
Too young at
12,
that age.
Maybe.
Depending on if they're comfortable. But
Boy.
yeah. So while both are safe, Singapore just personally feels safe on a whole different level. Yeah. But both are safe.
Okay, so are you finished with that? Because I want to transition us to the next point.
Go for it.
Getting stuff done. So we have been smacked with a variety of things in the past couple of weeks in just trying to get things done in Portugal. And what I mean by that is it's as simple as having this apartment furnished. And you know, we were having to work with our landlord because actually he was the one that put the contract out to get the apartment furnished. But still, we're the ones that are having to wait until the furniture's delivered to move in and whatnot. To other bureaucratic things having to go through with the housing project we're doing. A myriad of things,
different
honestly.
Departments.
Different
as well.
departments.
Yeah. So not just immigration, because I know we talked about how bureaucracy with immigration is crazy, but or just, not just that.
Or just purchasing a light bulb. You know.
Oh gosh, don't get Josh started on the light bulb.
Yesterday I went to the store, and I don't know if you've heard of this kind of light bulb, but it's a GU10. It's like a different. It's not the threaded.
You don't just screw it in.
You don't just screw it in.
You have to do something else, right?
Yeah, it's not the threaded ones that you just screw in, but it's got like these two metal prongs, and it kind of clicks into place.
They got a fancy lamp for us that we need a light bulb for.
So went to the store, and I asked the lady if they carried this type of light. She said, yes, we do. And she showed me one, and it was a very small light. I'm like, do you have anything bigger? And then she showed me a really big one. I was like, oh, okay, do you have anything in between these sizes? And all the meanwhile, the first and the second one, she showed me the back, that it was actually the GU10. And then I get this light bulb, the medium-sized light bulb, and I'm like, okay, this looks good. I like this. This is the one I want to buy. Then I get it home.
Well, but then she just gave you a different box, right? Or did she put something?
No. She went back. She grabbed the box with the medium one.
Okay.
So I could see this. I saw the size just by the box. And I was like, no, okay, this is the one I want. And then I got home, and it doesn't have the two prongs.
It is not the one you want.
but it still said a GU10 on it.
But the thing is the one that was in the box was different than what was labeled on the outside of the box, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was just indicative of like, you can't just go do a simple task once and then it's done.
Yeah.
Rule of threes.
Yeah.
Singapore,
that's a joke.
Not at all like that. Singapore, very it's efficient. Like, you know what to do. You take your paper, you take
they know what code, to do.
They know what to do, and it gets done. You know, in the database, in getting a stamp, a chop. They do like to do the old stamps in Singapore to have invoices paid or whatever. So in that regard, there's a bit of formality. But
what is it? It's a well-oiled machine. Is that what?
It is a well-oiled machine.
Yeah. Portugal is not so much. But I will say this. I feel like we're kind of bashing Portugal a little bit. One thing, just being honest, one thing that does make Singapore difficult is its location in the world. It is really hard, like unless you're from Asia or planning to travel around a lot of Asia, it's hard to get anywhere else. Everything else is far. So for us, families on the east coast of the U.S., and to travel between that, it literally takes 24 hours. I mean, you could do some direct flights. There's a direct flight, to California, but even that's like a 14-hour flight, and then you have to go to East Coast, which 4 or 5 hours. So that is like the least amount of time you could do, and those are obviously more expensive if you do like the more direct flights. But with now having a child and our parents getting older, it's harder for them to make that long of a flight. So this is where Portugal's nice, because since a lot of our family is on the East Coast, getting over to Europe is much more doable than getting over to Singapore or just Asia. So that is a difficult one, like when talking about would we move back to Singapore?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, one has to really decide between the two what kind of lifestyle they want to live. And part of that is what type of environment they want to live in. Do you want to live in Europe or do you want to live in Asia, specifically East Asia, and even more specifically Southeast Asia? Yeah. But Singapore, as far as a geographical point for that region, is phenomenal.
It's great. Yes.
It's phenomenal. Portugal is actually decent. I mean, you have a lot of options flying around either out of Porto or Faro and Lisbon as well. So those three airports will get you around.
Yeah.
But you're 100% right. If you have, whether it be family on the West Coast or East Coast or somewhere in between, I think Europe is better and probably cheaper.
Yeah.
In most circumstances, it would be cheaper. West Coast is a little different. And we've not done a deep dive on West Coast, but when it comes
Prices,
to Asia, when it comes to traveling.
Well,
Asia.
West Coast isn't bad, especially like if you're going out of Seattle and heading to Japan. That's a really
Tokyo.
common flight.
Yeah.
So that part is not so bad. Southeast Asia, if you're leaving out of California, they've got the direct flight from like San Francisco to Singapore. But again, that one's like 14 hours and it is quite pricey.
Yeah.
But so then I guess if you're coming from, let's say, San Francisco over to Portugal, you still have that maybe 4 or 5 hour trip to whether you're going to, New York or maybe Atlanta or Miami. And then you have your layover and then you come here, which still is 7 hours or so. So that is also pretty far.
Well, and even sometimes you'll have to connect somewhere in Europe before you get to Portugal.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
You're not always getting a direct flight into Portugal from East Coast US.
So that's fairly far as well.
Which those connecting flights would be London, Paris, Amsterdam, and somewhere in Germany.
Frankfurt.
Right? Frankfurt, maybe.
Frankfurt has a big hub. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it kind of just depends on, I guess, where you're coming from. But for us, so in considering, would we move back to Singapore, since we're talking about that personally, and we'll get to whether we would expat that, having to think about if we lived in Singapore, we would probably be the ones needing to go back to the U.S. more often to visit the grandparents, and even cousins and everything, just because a family of 5 getting over to Singapore is pricey and takes a long time. So it's where we are, I think, is a bit more manageable, or it's easier to maybe meet people somewhere. So if they're like, we're going to London or we're going here, we can meet them a little easier being in Europe. Yeah. And maybe more desirable of a place for people to want to come visit as well. Yeah. Meeting somewhere in Europe as opposed to somewhere in Southeast Asia.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, friends and family.
So many more people that are friends and family of ours are more interested in Europe than Asia.
Yeah, and have already come. In the 4 years we've been here, more have come than I think the whole time we were in Singapore in those 4 years.
Well, now the interesting thing is I had this conversation with my dad just recently, and he and my stepmom, Mary Lou, were like, we definitely want to go see Singapore again.
Because they didn't visit us.
They loved it.
They didn't visit us when we lived there, but they met us out there on this trip because Josh's dad retired, so had more time. And they really liked it.
They loved it.
Yeah. So they were only there a couple of days, so they didn't get to see all of it. Which, Singapore is small. We did a lot in those few days, but
but Singapore is small, but it's also very diverse. There's a lot that can be done, and we just dash through stuff like
see this
little samplings of the different neighborhoods that one can get lost in. One of the points I wanted to bring up is that we now have, because we've hit the 4-year mark here, we now have a fair comparison when talking about kind of what was our development or trajectory like in terms of living in both places. And if we had talked about this any sooner, if we had talked about this at the 2-year mark living in Portugal, our feelings and our answer would be quite different. So I think the fact that we're at 4 years here in Portugal and we lived 4 years in Singapore, it's right to talk about society and the let's say the community, the friends that we made.
Right.
Now we did have 2 different work situations, and I think that has made a massive impact on how we were able to integrate. On the other side of that, we are a family of 3 versus being just the 2 of us. Just the 2 of us. When we were living in Singapore. So
that's a different dynamic as well as the community. because of school and stuff.
Yeah, when we first arrived in Singapore, we hit the ground running. We were working jobs at a school, and the school gave us kind of like an instant group of friends, people that we could become friends with. And then moving to Portugal, it was, you know, in the midst of COVID, we had each other. We had a young daughter. The channel was what it was, but not many people were moving over. So people from that knew us from the channel hadn't actually arrived here. The language barrier, cultural barrier that exists was definitely there. And it was hard. I would say that year 4 in Portugal has been the best year that we've had.
Okay.
And I feel like we need to do a video on that. We need to do like an overview of year 4, because we've done like after each year we've completed in Portugal, we've done a video on it. We haven't done year 4 yet, but we just finished year 4.
Yeah.
Year 4 has been the best yet.
Okay.
Spoiler alert for that video.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it was very different. It was a very different style of move than we had that we did for Singapore.
Yep.
But I don't know. And then also too, like the
what don't you know about?
Well, I'm just trying to think about like the first year in Singapore. You're right. We were kind of plopped down. We had jobs. We worked at international school, so we almost had immediate friends in a sense. And then we started making
like cool
friends
people.
with locals. Yeah, friends that we wanted to hang out with. And then here we moved in the middle of COVID, so no one could really go out. And so I'm trying to think like when we first actually started meeting people. You know, a few people reached out to us who had recently moved as well. And we kind of just started hanging out with them, which we met in a grocery store, you know? So there are a few that we met in kind of roundabout ways the first few months when we moved to Portugal, and we do still hang out with them, which is cool.
Yeah.
But it was a lot slower going.
Yeah, I actually had this question on, I think it was on the podcast channel. Someone asked, no, actually it was on the main Expats Everywhere channel. Someone asked about making friends and how difficult it was making friends when you have a kid. And one of the first people that we met, shout out Rachel, she and Kalie got to know each other in a mom's group on Facebook. So they connected on Facebook, and I guess kind of quickly both of you decided like that Facebook group really wasn't for you, but
we liked each other.
But you liked each other.
Yeah.
And that's someone that we have remained friends with. And now that she's moved to London, we go and visit her. And her daughter and Valencia, our daughter, love hanging out. They're basically besties.
Yep.
So like that's one relationship as well that we were able to have when we first moved, like within the first month, and cultivate and maintain for the last 4 years. But those types of things were few and far between, whereas in Singapore, we hit the ground running with many friends.
Yeah.
Both professional, and then after about 6 months, also
more locals that we were able to meet. I mean, what does help there is everyone speaks English in Singapore.
Yeah.
So that's another thing, the language barrier that we can get to. But
and people have a connection and understanding of American culture in Singapore.
Yes.
That exists here in Porto as well, and in Portugal, where there's maybe not a connection, but an understanding because of American media. But it's weird. I think some Portuguese, and if you're Portuguese listening to this, you can correct me, but I think some Portuguese want to like reject American things, Americanisms, American culture, while others really like it and want to embrace it. We didn't find that to be true in Singapore.
Like everyone embraced it.
It's not even an embracing, but it was like a neutral feeling
it was just there.
Versus like, I don't like Americans, or like, no, I love Americans.
Yeah,
it was just neutral. Like we were just accepted.
Normal to be there. But I think that's because they do experience a lot of expats that go there for work. There are a lot of people on expat packages there that go for work, so from all over, but so there's just a lot of Americans that have been going there for a while anyway. I think Portugal, maybe it's a bit more recent, and so it's quite easy to make it seem like there's a lot and blame for certain things, so there might be some Portuguese who are upset about certain aspects of a lot of Americans flooding, which is not the case. That it's not like that when you look at the numbers. But
Yeah.
So that's true. There is that. But I do want to go back to real quick.
Go back.
The person who you said that commented about meeting people with if you have kids. Actually, kids here, it's quite easy because you get into a school and then you start meeting people who your kids are friends with, and you want to hang out with the parents as well, and people are just in the same stage of life as you.
Sometimes you want to hang out with the parents and not the kids.
That's crazy. I mean, hopefully you do like the parents. I think that's a tricky one. If the kids like each other and you don't like the parents, and it's like,
yeah.
Oh, but that happens everywhere in the world, right? Not just here. But I think that's actually quite easy once you get your kid into a school or an activities, extracurriculars and stuff, and you start meeting the parents, especially if there's more international parents. If they're Portuguese, then working on your Portuguese would be helpful. But a lot of them speak English anyway. But it is kind of more helpful to have a command of the language. Portuguese, which is a little different in Singapore because everyone speaks English and it's one of the national languages. So you don't ever have to go up to someone and ask them if they speak English. They will speak English in Singapore. Here, you just give it a go first in Portuguese,
Yeah. You could feel left out at times in Singapore, though, if you don't speak some Chinese, some Mandarin.
In certain areas, yeah.
Because
that's like
or
another
knowing
official
some
language.
of the Singlish.
Yes,
yeah. Like, Singlish is not the way we talk about, like, Portuñol being a blend of Portuguese and Spanish. Singlish is, like, its own language.
Their own words.
Own words that are based on Mandarin words.
But you use it in English.
It gets slid into, like, an English sentence, and you'll just be lost.
Yeah.
Because that word is, like, the important word in the phrase or the sentence, and you're just like, yep, I have no idea what we're talking about.
What you just said. Once you learn those, though, you're fine.
Yeah, I never learned them, though.
That's not true. Yeah,
No,
we could
not
ask.
much.
Well,
Not
we
many.
always had
I've
we
got
had
like
friends
a
where we could
half a
ask.
dozen.
We could just ask them.
Yeah.
And the accent too. Sometimes that can throw people off.
Sometimes
it can be thick.
That's a very good point. So even though Singaporeans do speak English, the accent for people that are not used to accents can be, I almost want to say, insurmountable.
Oh, okay.
It depends on the person.
Yeah.
Dad, sorry. I don't mean to call you out.
But how exposed you've been to a variety of accents will probably play into it, because if you're used to trying to pick up English with different accents, then it'll be easier. If you're not used to that, then it could be difficult.
Yeah.
At least at first, until you get used to it.
Absolutely. Okay, so one of the biggest shocks that I had when we visited Singapore this time, compared to what we had said about it, based on our living experience there, between the years of, help me out here, 2016, 2019? 2015, 2019. Okay. July 2015, yeah. Okay. Price.
Oof.
Wow. Prices have gone up globally, right? Or in most places, significantly. Mm-hmm. But in Singapore, it's soul crushing. It is so much how, like, housing prices have gone up significantly. And granted, we didn't have to worry about it living there, but I did look at, like, what our old apartment was, and it's gone up significantly.
And asking friends still live there.
And it's like, you're going up significantly on an already high price. So that's something that I kind of mentally stored away. The other thing is how quickly prices for, like, food and drink have gone up. And I'm not just talking about alcohol, but I'm talking about, like,
is that a restaurant?
Going to a restaurant, going to a hawker center. The inflation there has been pretty significant.
You have to be on really good wages.
Yeah.
Or go on an expat package where a lot of this stuff is covered. Like, are they covering your housing? Are they covering school for your kids?
Yeah.
So you have to have a really good package like that, or be working and have really high wages. Yeah. So that's a big thing. Like, what we do now, well, visa wise, I don't think what we do now, we could even get a visa for Singapore. Could we?
You haven't looked into it.
Yeah, I think it'd be really difficult. And then just wages, like what we make now, and how much further it goes living in Portugal, and how much more comfortable of an active lifestyle we can have.
Yep.
Compared to what we are making now in Singapore would be very different.
Because when we were living there, we were making double what we're making now. What do you think a good salary would be in Singapore? Like, good in terms of, like, you live a good lifestyle. A good lifestyle? Yeah. Like in Sing dollars? Yeah, for a couple. No, you can say it in USD.
Well, but I guess if I'm thinking in Sing dollars, I guess around 4,000.
per person. So 8,000 total.
No. Don't you think a couple could do it? Because if you're obviously same housing, if you find housing for $2,500, like a 1-bedroom,
You could live on that. I think it's possible, but
maybe it wouldn't be as nice.
I don't think that the lifestyle would be very.
How much
attractive.
are you thinking?
Probably 65.
Sing dollars?
Yeah.
Which it's somewhat close, right? I
So
mean, so you're thinking like 5,000 USD.
5,000 USD.
Yeah.
To live it like a.
But it also depends on what you're going to eat. I think that, remember, like,
Totally.
And even when we lived there, it was the same. A hawker, which are like these outdoor stalls, or like fixed outdoor stalls, which is more local food, or that's cheaper.
Think
you can
of it
have
like
meals.
a food court.
Yeah.
Without brands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to eat something like that, it's going to be a lot cheaper. We used to eat that for lunch every day because it made more sense for us to do that than buy and pack our own lunch. But hold on. If we were going to go out and eat like a burger, like a nice burger, then it would be like way more expensive. So depending on what you're thinking about eating and drinking and that type of lifestyle will depend on how it fluctuates, how much you should be making.
No, I totally agree. But I think where I'm at is I saw the prices, I think a little more than you.
Yeah.
I was paying for stuff more.
Well,
so
I don't pay attention to prices as much.
Yeah.
I was like, what? I want that burger. Okay.
Yeah. So what I mean is at our hawker center that we used to go to near our school, which is out of the tourist district, you could pay $3.50 on the low end for a meal. Now it's like $5, that's a significant jump, right?
Yeah.
That's by percentage, that's a significant jump. At the touristy hawker centers, you used to pay like $5 to $7. And now it's like $7 to $12, depending on what you get.
Which is crazy.
And crazy to pay 12 Singapore dollars at a hawker center.
Yeah. But the
like
problem
12
is,
would be like $10.
But the problem is you used to be able to go, to a place and get a burger for there, like maybe 15, what do you think, for a burger? And now it's probably 30. Depending on a nicer burger.
At the same place, it's probably like
25?
Like low 20s to mid 20s.
Yeah, so it's also gone up, but it's like, seems
double.
a little crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Prices have gone crazy.
So I think in some regards, if you're comparing it to the States, for example, it would be like pretty similar prices to major cities. Maybe not like New York or LA prices, but like the next tier down in terms of like expensive cities in the US, it'd be like that. Mm-hmm. Comparing it to Portugal though, Portugal's mid-range food scene is cheaper. Portugal's low-end food scene, I think, is probably on par with what you can do in Singapore. And then it just comes down to what do you like taste-wise.
Mm-hmm. No, but that's a good point. Because
I might prefer Singapore.
Ooh, okay, we'll come back to that. But a good point in the sense that you could get a menu of the day, and that would kind of be the range of some of the hawkers, right?
Yeah, you can get a menu of the day still in Porto for $6.50, but the majority of them are like 8 to 10.
Yeah.
10.
So then thinking about what's next, like if I wanted to say the burger is next, in Singapore, if I'm going to pay, let's say 10 at a hawker, but then I'm going to be paying 25 for the burger.
Yeah.
Here, if I'm going to be paying 10, the burger is only going to be 15, right? So that next
wait. Okay.
That next step of food, like you're saying, isn't as high.
So if you're talking about a hawker burger.
No, I don't think you get a burger at a hawker.
You can.
No, I'm not talking about
like a bougie burger.
No, but I'm not talking about a hawker burger. I'm just talking about a restaurant.
A fast food?
No, not fast food, but not like super swanky.
But see, here's the thing, and this kind of is another little detail that needs to be unveiled, is that Singapore is extremely commercial. So a lot of the restaurants that you find in the U.S., for example, you'll find there. Like if you like Five Guys, they've got Five Guys.
Like chains.
If you like Shake Shack, they've got Shake Shack. Like that type of thing. So those burgers are a mid-tier price.
Yeah.
But not below that. Below that, you can find those kind of burgers, and you're probably paying 6 to 10 Sing. Whereas I think in Portugal, you might be paying like €250, €3
for that type. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. The mid-range, like you mentioned, it makes more sense. You don't go up such a big gap.
Yeah.
But you were saying that you like the food in Singapore better than Portugal.
Yeah.
Like Singaporean food versus Portuguese food, or just the variety?
The variety, the availability of food.
Yeah,
the only
true.
food that consistently let me down in Singapore was Italian.
Yeah.
For some weird reason.
Which you could just make that yourself
I just
anyway.
make it myself.
We can do that ourselves, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well.
But in terms of like fresh foods and all that stuff.
Yeah, Singapore does offer a lot.
But speaking of fresh foods, I went into grocery stores a couple times, and oh my gosh, it was so expensive. Now, granted, the ones that I went to were in the tourist center, and when we lived there, we never had to go into a grocery store in the tourist center.
Area, yeah.
So I don't know if like our old grocery store would have been priced
that high.
Probably
not that high, but still higher.
Yeah, but we find our grocery bill in Portugal to be good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not expensive at all.
Okay, so I think we've unpacked a lot. Should we get to whether we would move back there?
Yeah. So
you want to go first?
Would you expat that? That's that time. Yes, I'll go first. I am not itching to move back to Singapore. I 100% would move back to Singapore, and I think that moving back to Singapore could potentially be in the cards at some point in our life. But I'm not currently angling to move back to Singapore. And you, Madame.
Okay, yes. That's a good answer. I think that I have always thought I would love to go back to Singapore because of the amazing, quality of life you can have, the safety with a daughter, just being able to give her the freedom of moving around when she's a little older, and knowing that she's okay. I've thought about that, but then I've also thought, like I mentioned before, the being so far away from family and just making sure that we're keeping those ties with her, being able to see her grandparents and her cousins and everything. So that kind of has me at a battle in my head. I love Singapore. I did forget how hot it was. It was pretty hot, even though I like the heat. Yeah, it was pretty hot. Just, expect to sweat, which is fine. So in some ways, I think Portugal is better there. So I kind of go back and forth on certain things that I could and couldn't do. And I would say, yes, I would 100% expat Singapore. I love Singapore. But I think I'm on there with you. Like, I'm not necessarily itching to go there now. It wasn't like we went back to visit and I was like, we need to go now. And the first time we visited Singapore, we were like, we need to move here. And that was our next place. That we lived. So while I really liked it, and I think that it's got a lot of good things going on, it's not for right now. Timing is not right.
Timing is definitely not right. I am so relieved that both of us had that same feeling, because I think it would have been complicated had one of us been like,
I'm ready to go there now.
I'm ready to go back.
Yeah, that's true.
That would have been rough, because we would have been not on the same page.
Not on the same continent either. No. But yes, I think right now we both feel that Portugal is where we want to be, where we're happy, despite some of the bureaucracy stuff or whatever.
Despite some of the negatives that we discussed
that we
in this
mentioned,
video.
It's still worthy of us being here, and we still want to be here for a lot of reasons. So Portugal is where we are now, and then we'll see for the future.
And we hope to remain worthy to remain in Portugal.
Yeah, hopefully
Portugal's worthy.
They give us citizenship, right? That's our next goal.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a growing heart connection to Portugal. I've had this feeling for a while. I don't know if it happened like the day that we traveled to Porto for the first time, but there is just something about this place that I don't know.
Yeah, I think that Portugal has kind of been in our hearts since we first moved to Spain. Yeah. So back in 2009, when we came to visit Portugal, there was something about Portugal that was there. So it's kind of been around for a while for us. So
yeah, we wrote that actually in our letter to get our visas. You know, wrote a heartfelt letter. They probably saw like the teardrops on the page. Actually, I think it was electronic.
No, we had to have a printout. A
printed copy. But
at that point, you could mail it in. Yeah. Back in the day.
But no, Portugal, amazing place. Singapore, also an amazing place.
Go visit if you haven't.
Singapore is living in the future. And if you like to live in the future, like both time zone wise and just technology and efficiency.
The way things look,
it's a place that you should check out for sure. For sure.
Don't be afraid of it being Asia. It's Asia light, we say to people. So it's a good place to visit.
It's an amazing spot in Asia.
Yep.
It's amazing. Don't knock it. Be like my dad and my stepmom, who I don't want to say reluctantly went, but it wasn't like they were pining to go to Singapore. It was just kind of an easy place, since that was the area that we were living or visiting rather. And they loved it. And it's a place they want to go back. They're like, shoot, we didn't spend enough time here because it's so darn cool. So consider it. For a more extensive breakdown, check out the YouTube channel, the main channel that will have like going through different points like taxes and safety and using food and a bit more data, as well as some of our opinion too. But we wanted to unpack it more here for you. It is officially unpacked. So we're staying in Portugal.
All
right. Well, until next time, let's get moving.
Bye.
Bye.